Road. Good early evening, everybody. Welcome to Good to Grow in Nevada County. And my name is Pascal. I am the editor of Ubinet. I will be your moderator. So welcome to all our panelists and our attendees. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section and we will definitely get to them. So the purpose of this, which is our second Good to Grow webinar, is even with the challenges coronavirus, this county staff and others are continuing to work with the community to help build a safe, legal, and thriving cannabis businesses in Nevada County. And they want to hear your ideas on building a cannabis equity program. Personally, I have no idea what that would look like, so I'm really looking forward to what each of our panelists can tell us about it, and I want to hear your ideas. And so, what type of assistance would help the most to become permitted or help with business sustainability? If there was financial assistance available, big if, where would you want those funds focused? What kind of vital components do you think are needed for the implementation of a successful cannabis equity program? And I know that we have several people from the public that also had input that was not necessarily geared towards equity for growers and businesses, but equity towards the community from the growers, basically talking about, hey, you are the ones in compliance, congrats, but what about all the others? Where's the equity there? So bring your insights, your feedbacks, but I'm gonna kick this over to Craig, who actually knows way more. It was his idea, so Craig, you're up.
All right, thanks, Pascal. Good evening, everyone. My name is Craig Griesbach. I'm the director of the Building Code and Cannabis departments here at the county. Thank you for joining us for this discussion about our local cannabis equity program. So over the last year, the county has partnered with the California Center for Rural Policy and Humboldt State University to create a Nevada County Cannabis Equity Assessment and Program. This assessment provides a summary of data and recommendations for a local equity program that will provide assistance to community members that experienced harm from decades of criminalization of cannabis and poverty to support their successful participation in the legal cannabis market here in Nevada County. On the panel today to hear the feedback regarding the topic and help answer any questions if we have time for that at the end is Jeff Merriman, who's the Cannabis Compliance Program Manager for the county, Thomas Maoli, who is a Cannabis Compliance Officer here at the county, and Don Ardledge and Dominic Corva, representing Humboldt State University and the work that they're doing. Over the last several years, the community has been a great partner with county staff to helping shape local cannabis policy and programs as we move forward. With the partnership in mind, the primary intent of this session is to continue that collaboration and hear feedback regarding thoughts and needs for a local cannabis equity program. So as Pascal mentioned, she mentioned a couple of guiding questions that were part of this program, such as, you know, if there was type of assistance, what would that look like for business sustainability? If there was financial assistance, what would that look like? And where should we spend those funds? So there's some guiding questions that we're really looking for your feedback on. So we also have a survey with several questions about this topic that's available at goodtogrow@nevadacounty.org that we would appreciate your feedback on if you haven't taken that survey already. And I'll post that link in the chat as this session presumes. With that all said, I would like to introduce Don Ardledge and Dominic Corva with Humboldt State University, because they really are the experts, they're the brains behind all of this. I'm just kind of along for the ride in a lot of ways, and they've been helping me guide this as we move along. To give a brief overview of their work before handing back to Pascal to really hear feedback from you all. Don?
Thanks. Yeah, thank you for having us. We're happy to be here and can't wait to hear from all of you. So real briefly, all of this work stems from the 2018 California Cannabis Equity Act. the purpose of that bill, SB 1294, was to make sure that people most harmed by cannabis criminalization and poverty would get assistance, like Craig said, to enter the legal cannabis industry as entrepreneurs or employees with high quality, well-paying jobs. In order to accomplish this, Senate Bill 1294 created a fund for local jurisdictions that had conducted cannabis equity assessments and created cannabis equity programs to apply for funding to assist local residents in gaining entry to and successfully being a part of the regulated cannabis marketplace. So as Craig said, Nevada County contracted with CCRP. We had done some work with Humboldt County and Mendocino County before we started talking with Nevada. And we have prepared a draft equity assessment and program. It's going to be great to get some input and feedback tonight. I just want to highlight a couple quick things about how we did the assessment, and then I'm going to let Dominic finish up CCRP's brief presentation. So the goal of the equity assessment was to provide a data-informed look at the history of cannabis criminalization and poverty and who was most affected in the county, and then provide policy recommendations to help the county develop a local equity program that would help people who were most impacted. And the recommendations are also designed to help the county ensure that there's equity and diversity in the industry, as it is, an emerging industry. So we looked at a whole bunch of public data, arrest data, school data, public health. We looked at your some economic assessments the county had done, some health assessments. And then Dominic and some other members of our team, we conducted about 40 interviews. We interviewed elected officials, we interviewed county staff, we interviewed probably some of you, some lawyers with expertise in cannabis, people affected by cannabis criminalization, and law enforcement. So using those two sources of data, we created the equity assessment. And Dominic, I want to hand it off to you to kind of round this out with your perspective on this work.
Great, thank you, Dawn. So the essay prompt for the assessment really comes from the grant program at the state level, which is, tell us how cannabis criminalization, has impacted the communities in your jurisdiction. The language in there is, it's got a few other things to it. It does mention the war on drugs more broadly as well, but it presents an opportunity to try to tell the story of communities in the county and how they were impacted by cannabis criminalization. And so there are parts of it that are common with other rural counties, especially other rural legacy cultivation counties. And it's not just helicopters, and it's not just, police impacts, but also the struggle between that moment when the state started to regulate, or the counties decided to start to regulate in response to SB 420 in particular, and the arrival essentially in late 2015, December 2015, of what was called MRSA at the time. This was a contentious period for pretty much everywhere in California, and battles over ordinances and how to move forward in a realistic way with the communities that were, participating in cannabis markets, how to move them into the future that was, regulated. So our focus involved looking at the history back to the 1970s in particular, and identifying the threads that run through that history up to the present day, but may have been kind of put into some pretty intense relationships, especially between 2008 to 2016. And obviously for Nevada County, it's that link between, you know, what were those countercultural sort of back to land environmental, like, you know, values and how they played out in Nevada County that gave birth really to the medical cannabis networks and markets. They weren't just markets; they were also, you know, networks of giving that were there in 1996 when that became possible. And so, you know, with the help of many of my interviewees, we attempted to construct a story that connected those historical threads to the present day and came up with recommendations that reflected where the county was trying to go with the communities that were a part of it, that were there to stay, not just the people who kind of came in maybe to speculate and leave. And so, you know, I could have interviewed 100 people. I could have kept interviewing, and I wanted to, but you know, after about 40, and with certain limits and the way it became clear, the Nevada story is a unique story. It's different from Mendocino. It's different from Lake, which we're also working on, and other rural counties. And so, our recommendations for the local equity program are therefore drawn from the assessment. And the assessment identifies communities and individuals impacted by the war on drugs. That included, you know, women medicine makers, patient providers, volunteers that may have had some rough encounters with law enforcement, quite frankly, that may have been caught up in the sort of, you know, the difficulty of reconciling the need to move to the future and the politics of disciplining the past. So in the LEP, you know, we have recommended qualifications for equity stakeholders. Like, who are these people that could qualify? And, you know, some of those they share with other rural counties, some of them they share with urban jurisdictions, but some of them very specific to Nevada County. And the recommendations have been constructed around those stories and helping those people and people like them. And so that's what you see in the LEP in terms of recommended qualifications, such as, you know, past participation in the Caladrius network or as a volunteer with ASA, but also, you know, women medicine makers, you know, thoughts about possible directions that an equity program could set people up to actually be a part of the future where now they can't. And so that's the overview. And I hope definitely to continue to get feedback. I commend Craig immensely and Nevada County for working so closely with the communities in question. That's also different about Nevada County, is that you have an excellent working relationship and a history of taking feedback and working with it as much as you can, given state constraints, because that's also obviously, you know, a consideration. And some of those constraints aren't just regulations. Some of them are, you know, what will GoBiz actually allow you to spend money on? And that's where things get a little difficult sometimes, because they want money to go to people trying to get a license. But our story is one of community impacts. And that doesn't always mean that there's, you know, grants available for, you know, community investment, for example. But we want to hear from all of you and to take into account as much as we can, given the constraints.
Thank you, Dominic. I appreciate it. Pascal, we'll send it back to you and see if we can start hearing some feedback.
All right. So the first thing that I would really like to have people discuss is questions that came from members of the community who are not growers, not in the business, and basically voicing their concerns about equity. Because why equity? Because there's all these illegal grows that are affecting the reputation and the standing of legal growers, and they are crushing the legitimate businesses. And you who are trying to comply and who are trying to be this part of the community, there are problems, and there's a little bit of frustration because it was not, quote unquote, as advertised in the various board of supervisors meeting, and people are asking, where is the equity for the public that is not growing? Where is their equity? So I don't know if that is any part that what you guys want to address, but definitely there are quite a few questions that came in about that. So who wants to take that?
I can take a quick first stab at it. Is that one, the state grant program is specifically for people trying to get a license. So writing an assessment that tries to give money to people who aren't is just not, it doesn't really work. It would in fact result in the county not getting any money at all. Second, the question of impacts of criminalization, it's a tough one because certainly the things that they're concerned with and are talking about, include the prohibition markets, and those are a mixed bag. There are many people who continue to do it for a livelihood and are really careful about their regenerative agriculture, and they tend to be smaller scale and lower key. And there are absolutely people who are speculators, extractors from the landscape. But it's out of the scope of what's kind of possible with the equity program that the state wants to see.
And just to piggyback on that a little bit too, Pascal, is, this is essentially what we're talking about as a tool. It's another tool for our tool belt to be able to help people come into compliance. It's nothing, in my mind, it's nothing but positive, because it helps people maybe push over into the threshold of becoming permitted and becoming a taxpayer into that business industry. Obviously, enforcement is another side of this, and we've talked about it a lot internally, that permitting and enforcement go hand in hand. But in a lot of ways, like I said, this is just another tool for the toolbox, and it's another thing that we can help people hopefully become into the legal industry.
I think that really helps. And some of the questions here, one of the questions is that many people are so smaller landholders, under 5 acres, and there are questions about viability for these small scale operations. And so how is there help available? How do we help those people?
So I think I'll take a first stab at it. Is for smaller farmers, that is very much what this could be intended for. I mean, people that were impacted by this, a lot of them are legacy small farmers that have been here for a long time, been growing for 30 plus years. So this is exactly the type of assistance that could help them come into the legal market. So I guess it's how we'll help them. I think they're probably one of the primary stakeholders in this. I don't know, Don or Dominic, if you have any additional.
Fully concur. I fully concur.
And of course, speaking of the legacy farmers, there are of course some of the regulations that prevent people that had at some point a code compliance visit, etc. There are some barriers to taking the plunge and the going legit. So is there any way to provide help for those? And I think Patricia is like, it's not just those affected by the war on drugs, but also to bring in non-licensed growers. Is there leeway for help for those who want to become legal?
Yes, and so it's both, because being impacted by the war on drugs, and as Craig has pointed out, the small scale legacy growers have been singled out by the narrative as equity stakeholders, that's exactly who would qualify. And so I'm not sure I understand.
I believe the Nevada County ordinance has there are some restrictions that are built in that would prevent somebody who had code compliance issues based on cultivation to obtain a license. Is that
So-
still the case?
Yes. So if there are code compliance issues that can be dealt with financial assistance, that's what this equity program will help fund. So there's a limit to what we can do about like the county's regulations, and this community's engagement with the county, I think, has been more productive than other counties. And so that if the issues are, regulations that can't change right now, then that's sort of a different arena. But if those issues about code compliance can be rectified through a grant, those can be dealt with. That's what this equity program is for.
Yeah, so sorry, Pascal.
No, go ahead, Craig.
So if the example, if they're on RA land and they have 5 acres and they're essentially don't have the correct zoning locally based on the regulations, the equity at the time of the regulations, if they're that way, when we get equity grant funding and we have a program, it wouldn't help them because they couldn't come into the legal market based on local regulations. I hope that helps clarify a little bit.
I believe that, yeah. And that which probably opens then a larger discussion actually about current and possible future land use regulations. And we have somebody who says when it comes to where funds could help people transition into the legal market, the high costs that are barriers come down to land use regulations. How can you help the situation when land use regulations are geared towards rural development that current landholders have to face? It's probably a larger issue than just equity, but also can this help and could this initiate a larger land use regulation revision, or maybe when there is the general plan update, when that comes around, is cannabis cultivation, can that be taken into consideration for an update on the land use regulation?
I think the equity program and land use regulation are really two separate things as far as how they can apply and how assistance is provided. I think from a policy perspective, the county is having additional discussions over this next year based on board direction for additional license types, for example. So like larger cultivation, micro business models, and things like that. But they really are separate based from if we were to change to smaller parcels or increased in zoning types and things like that. They are two separate issues.
Could this program be used to maybe compensate for certain loss of income for some of the businesses that donate some of their product for compassion programs aimed at meeting patients' needs? Because the participant says, I would love to see our equity program assist patients downstream by incentivizing operator participation in local compassion programs. Is that an option?
I think I do have, one way to answer this, which is that it depends on whether those particular cultivators meet equity stakeholder qualifications. And it kind of sounds like from what we're recommending in terms of past participation, for example, in the collaborators network, that could be on the table. There's also the matter of, there's a lot of knowledge out in the community about medicinal products. There's a lot of knowledge about medicinal products and also medicinal genetics. Nevada County definitely was an epicenter of CBD and type 2 and type 3 cannabis cultivation. And if we can get those people in on a micro business license, for example, I think the door would be more open for them to be able to operate with some assistance in a way that could help a business model that could work, but it would probably have to go kind of both ways. It's tough to imagine a business model where people could, get a grant basically just to operate as just a nonprofit. But if it was a nonprofit applying for a license, a microbusiness license perhaps, they can become a node in the network. And the possibilities for grant funding would then be there.
And I think that ties also into Patricia's comment that is equity being defined to only support farmers who are not in the legal market? What about those of us who have become legal and need support to acquire these microbiz licenses? I think that would be precisely what you just said.
Yeah, I think that would be one way to address that. Yeah, the support will be available for folks who need it and qualify as equity stakeholders that already have a license. That's definitely in the LEP. It's for the range, that is people seeking to get in, people who have a local permit but not a state license, and people who still need to get maybe their CEQA finalized for the state license. They're we're not leaving out the people who are already in who also face challenges. It's about qualifying as an equity stakeholder and being able to define those challenges in such a way that the grant program would open up for them.
And we're coming back to equity, separating equity from land use. How can we continue to do that? Cannabis industry accessibility comes down to land use regulations. So it definitely, there seems to be definitely an appetite to define equity as well, land use regulations. So is there a way that, for example, with, I don't know, Craig, you are probably very familiar with, would there be a way to create like an overlay on, be that on RA or wherever, to create a cultivation overlay in land use regulations, and thereby providing some better access and opening it up more and making it easier for growers to actually become the business that they want to become?
I think that's what we're kind of figuring out when we evolve this program and evolve the regulations locally. We're realizing this is a evolving industry in general, and that we need to adapt to survive. And that's part of the discussion we've had about larger cultivation sizes and micro business license types and additional stuff like tourism to be able to survive and have our market be sustainable long term. So we are working on that currently. Staff are going to be working on that this next year. We've already had some initial discussions to be able to make it more achievable to become permitted, kind of like as you mentioned, Pascal. But it is a work in progress. This does take time as we learn the industry and as other counties evolve and as possibly federally evolves a little bit more as well.
Yeah, if I could just follow up with that, like the equity program isn't the be all end all of equity talk and discussions. Like I like to think about it as two things, actually. Equity programs are one thing, and then there's systemic equity as a conversation. Because if you come up with an equity program to get people into a system that is characterized by inequity, you're probably not doing anyone a favor. It's still going to be difficult for them once they're in, if the system itself continues to be inequitable. And I think that there's a network of systems. There's the national prohibition, fact of prohibition. There's the state level, and there's the county level. And so I think that an equity program provides a platform for conversations about systemic inequity to be addressed. It won't change systemic inequity in and of itself. It's a piece, it's a tool, as Craig was talking about earlier. But I do believe it's also a platform for discussions to evolve about systemic equity.
If I could just add to one thing to this, is that in the other counties we've been working with, like, this is what all the jurisdictions are struggling with as the landscape around legalization has changed and state regulations have changed, and all those of you trying to understand the shifting landscape around land use, permitting, ordinances related to cannabis. This is like everyone in the same boat of counties trying to keep up, and then people who are trying to enter the legal industry trying to keep up, and the state shifting and changing and evolving. So it's a really dynamic situation that I think all the counties are dealing with, right, Dominic? Don't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean by systemic inequity. Like, it's not peculiar to Nevada County. I would say what's peculiar to Nevada County is the conversation is a lot more open, I think. And I think you have people who actually understand the complexity of the issue, listening to you.
Okay. So just for maybe getting a better flow, if it's okay with the attendees, if you want to make a comment and if you want to show your smiling faces, this group is small enough that I can pull people and make you a panelist for the time to make a comment. So if that's something that you're interested in, please let me know, and because then we'll just have you at least talk and interact with our panelists to get a better flow going here. And Monica, if you unmute yourself, please.
Okay, do you hear me, Pascal?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Dawn, I read the document that you forwarded. I think that Dominic created, and I have to say you guys did a great job. That assessment really captured some history around cannabis in the county that as a local activist, even I didn't know. And I just want to make a pitch specifically. Well, I know, Dominic, I really appreciate you calling out the women medicine makers. They really are legacy farm mamas, and they've been making medicine for patients for a long time here in the county. But I want to add a layer to that, which is to call out the negative impact on cannabis wives, cannabis moms. These are women who support the family while the farming activity goes on. And in many cases, through both enforcement during prohibition, but also during the transition to the regulated space, many of these families have split up due to the financial impact. And I personally know many cannabis moms who are now divorced. Some of them have been separated, their ownership in the land. Some of them have been engaged in fights over who owns the land and who's to keep that farm if there is a permit. And others are just booted out of the industry because of the divorces and the loss of funds and income. But they are farmers. They know how to cultivate this medicine. And it's a special group. And I'm sure this goes on in all the legacy counties. It's not just here. But women don't have a voice in the cannabis industry like they should, and everybody knows it's true. And these women have kids, and they have expertise, and they have the skills, and if they could get the support as single moms who've been separated from the industry because of financial stress, it would be a great leg up for those families. Thanks, Pascal.
Thank you for that comment. I really, really take it to heart. I think that's something that we should follow up on.
I agree. And I do want to say that we We have been trying to find data and information on particular impacts on women, and the focus you suggested wasn't so much in our minds as women who may be working on grows and like how they were historically treated when the industry was not legal, and yet these women have a lot of knowledge. So it's an excellent point. It's really difficult to find. It's one of those very hidden, kind of under the surface issues that we have had a hard time talking about in the assessment. But I definitely took notes of what you said, and I think we can talk about if there's a way we can build. There's a very, very brief mention in the assessment about negative impacts specifically on women in the industry. But yeah, thanks so much for that comment.
I actually want to clarify. I definitely heard those stories, and I want to apologize that I didn't incorporate them clearly enough. And that's on me. And I think that's something I want to address.
Great. And I received right just now via email and some suggestions, items to take into consideration for potential cannabis equity applicants. There should be a residency requirement, and the person suggests that 10-year residency requirement that must have been involved with the local cannabis community in some way for 3 or more years, member of the alliance, contributed or participated in local cannabis policy advocacy, a member or supporting donor of the Caladrius network. People should also have participated, donated, or have been a member of a local nonprofit, excluding the alliance, and owned, operated, employed, or was a member of a cannabis collective during the Prop 215 era. Those are some of the suggestions, and also that there should be, that application should include some type of community benefits for in the business plans that would be submitted. But so for example, local hiring, volunteering for local nonprofits, I mean, everything, just bringing some community benefits that would be part of the equity application. So if the person asks if those are things that can be taken into consideration, or if it is strictly based on people who want to become legal and just need help. Should there be barriers to entry for the equity program, or how would this be laid out?
So Craig, maybe I'll mention a couple of those that are proposed. So there is a residency consideration proposed in the current criteria. And I don't think it's 10 years. It is 5. There is consideration recommended for prior participation in Caladrius network. But I like the added input about other nonprofits. And there is consideration for those seeking license types that contribute to the availability and affordability of medical products, including but not limited to cultivation. This is all in draft form right now. Dominic, did I miss something?
No, I think you got it. And I did want to say that it's good feedback, and there's a lot of that actually, you know, would enrich what we've got there. I do want to say that anyone who participated in a medical cannabis collective is probably too broad. And then participation in donating to nonprofits, historically, that is also a little broad as well. And I don't say this because I don't think it's a good idea, but because it's got to meet Go Business standards in terms of qualifications, which are impacts of criminalization. And so we singled out the Collaborators Network and volunteering for the ASA chapter in particular, because those people were affected pretty heavily by criminalization. We demonstrated that in the assessment through specific stories, whereas having donated to a nonprofit is just, it's a little general and tough to tie into the specific experience that especially non-commercial medical cannabis caregivers, had. And so, I don't want to be, negative. I definitely think that there's a lot of good detail offered up here in terms of other things to think about and add to.
Okay, Mark Schaefer, if you unmute, there you go.
Thanks. When you were talking about the residency requirement, it just raised a little bit of red flags for me. When I sat on the community advisory group that put together the local ordinance, we had discussed during that group the possibility of a residency requirement. And we got feedback from county council that there were legal issues with doing something like that. So I don't know if you guys, because of the program that you're in, would be able to circumvent any legal issues with residency, but it's an issue that could raise some red flags.
So residency requirements are not uncommon for other equity programs throughout the state. And I want to say that the 5-year one that we have in there, that's obviously fungible, but it's also in the period between 1971 and 2016. So there's another element to it that's not just the 5 years, but also during the period when cannabis was most heavily criminalized. Although I'm aware of, and we do include in the assessment, events after 2016. Does that clear things up? We haven't had any issues with other counties in the residency requirement.
Am I unmuted still? Yeah, it does. I would also just caution that I guess I'm a little conflicted on the whole residency issue. And one reason in this context would be if there's somebody that actually does qualify for the equity program that's from out of the county that wants to come here to take advantage of the situation, then that could then prohibit them from doing that.
In the great point, Mark, and in the way the criteria is currently proposed, applicants do not have to meet all of the criteria. And so basically a person could still be eligible for equity funding without fulfilling that requirement. And of course, really all this is at the county's ultimate discretion. CCRP is just making recommendations. So Craig, I don't know if you have other thoughts on that.
No, I think you guys covered that fairly well.
Okay, another question that just came in over email. Could the equity program include a small debt forgiveness program? For example, could farmers with outstanding debts to business attorneys, the franchise tax board, etc., be able to show receipts and apply for a stipend, if you will, so that they have could be in they could go on more solid footing, and or maybe if the business failed, they would be able to move on to another job maybe.
I mean, the last part is probably problematic, but the first part, like it's part of their struggle to transition. So absolutely. grants could be available basically to pay for bills that like are preventing them from being able to transition or challenging them in that way. Absolutely. In my opinion, obviously, it's a recommendation. I think it's pretty clear in our framework that that is an interpretation that would make a lot of sense.
And we will hear from Diana. Diana, can you unmute?
Yes. Hi,
Hi.
everyone. Good evening. Diana Gamzon here. I just had a couple comments. Some of the feedback that we've gotten from our members on things that would be helpful from the Nevada County Cannabis Alliance, or our members with the Alliance, were loans and grants for those that are not just entering the system, but also renewing permits and renewing their licenses. That seems to be one of the biggest barriers to entry, are costs to compliance, road standards, fire regulations, and the list goes on and on. So I just want to give another tip to loans and grants being really helpful for farmers when they need help. It's really, it's funds. And then the other question / point I wanted to talk about was, now, if we were to apply for these funds in 2022, correct me if I'm wrong, the funds would not be available till 2023, I believe.
No.
It's 2022?
From our experience, the funds get dispersed, well before a year passes. And
Great.
Don could probably be a little more accurate with that. I'd say like the funds get ready to be dispersed really fast, actually. And then you've got a date by which you need to spend them.
Right.
So and then the other part is that in terms of loans and grants, a minimum of 80% of the funds that come from the state must go to people working on getting a license or facing challenges moving forward. So there's a 10% maximum technical assistance rule now, and a 10% administrative cost rule. But GoBiz wants this money to go directly to farmers to deal with exactly what you're talking about.
Perfect. Well, so my question was around was, we all know that have been working in this industry for as long as many of us have, that a year for cannabis is dog years. It's 7 years. Things move really quickly and things shift significantly month to month. And so I just wanted to get assurance that this document is a living document, and as market conditions change, as that this document can also shift with what the equity needs may be. And also that with that definition of those that are entering the market, and also does that also include those that are, I guess for lack of a better word, not re-entering the market, but are applying for renewals, et cetera, that those are already. So those are my two sort of points I wanted to make.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of point. The answer is absolutely yes. And then the living document part, it's a document that is owned by the county ultimately. And it's not like they can't change it when we give it to them. And I'm sure that I would certainly be happy to jump in and help with any assistance with that much later, just out of just service, So I want to. The other thing maybe we could do though, Dawn, is pay attention to how fast the funds get dispersed this year,
Yeah.
and be able to try to come back with an estimate for what that turnaround time will be.
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, I think in the local equity program, there's a lot of language in there that basically a lot of discretion is left for the county to adapt, change, and the Board of Supervisors. So there's lots of room in the language, and I made a note to make sure that we are clear on that, as well as those entering and applying for renewals, which yes, that is the intention, is that the qualifications can be for people just entering who are already licensed. So this year they released the notice of funding in December. grant applications were due in February. They announced awards. They'll be officially announcing awards next week. And then the county has to go through the process of figuring out disbursement of those funds. And so the funds do get released, but the counties do need time to figure it out. Part of what CCRP is trying to do is help facilitate that process. And but we will see if we can get some more, a couple other examples with the jurisdictions that have successfully moved into type 2. Exactly how long, and I think it gets a little quicker and quicker as more jurisdictions figure it out. I think the early adopter jurisdictions, it went slow because they were the very first ones trying to figure it out. And so it's getting, and GoBiz is getting a little more efficient. You know, things are getting streamlined as we go. But it's reasonable to think if you're funded in 2022 with type 2 in March of 2022, that funds could be dispersed then in sometime in 2022.
Yeah, and it's also going to be, the nice thing that you have is this lead time between the assessment and the grant round. And I encourage the county to, like, you know, come up with its process, you know, sooner rather than later, because some of the early adopter counties, you know, didn't even get around to trying to figure out a process for how to disperse the grants for a while. So, you know, a lot of that is, you know, who's the administrator? What are the, you know, we've hammered out the details of, you know, qualification. We've publicized it. People had time to apply and so forth. So definitely there's time to be prepared to turn it around quickly, but it will require conscious effort to do so.
And I think that was the intent. Well, I know that was the intent of Nevada County. So we had weighed options about applying this year and rushing it through, but we really decided to slow down to go fast, and to where when we apply next year, as we were planning, and we have funds, hopefully, that we can disperse, that we're ready to go. And we've had these conversations with the community and everyone to where we have a plan to where we can spend those funds. And it's not an issue that we haven't spent them in time or we're not prepared.
And I believe that partially also answers a question from Colin, who says, how similar is Nevada County's program compared to Oakland or Sacramento? Does it prioritize low-income minorities or quote unquote victims of the drug war? Would be very interested in being part of this, like it was mentioned before, for fire and public utility accesses. So those are things that we have that have been discussed, of course, that are pretty specific to Nevada County. But so how similar do you want this program to be, Craig?
So obviously a lot of the criteria, and Dominic and Don are probably better to answer this question, but a lot of the criteria for equity program is similar, dependent on what has happened locally in that jurisdiction. But a lot of the equity, there are a lot of similarities. So it really is, you have the similarities there, but you also want to cater it specific to the needs in our jurisdiction and the impacts that are actually real here. So it's a lot of similarities, like I said, but it's something that you have to look at it specifically for our jurisdiction. And Dominic or Don, and fill in for me.
I think it's an excellent response. And it points back to something Don said earlier, is that, like, no one of these criteria are disqualifying if someone hasn't met them. It's a range of criteria. And it's going to be up to the county to, you know, arrange them in either priority or equal mix, basically. And low income people of color, that's one of those things that is a standard thing for the equity program. Absolutely. but participation in the collateralist network is not, right? It doesn't mean that we're excluding the people of color and low-income people at all. In fact, those are explicitly recommended as eligibility criteria alongside the very specific stuff for Nevada County.
Yeah, and I think some of the other differences we're seeing in rural versus urban is like the license types. So we're seeing lots of cultivation permits in rural counties, and that's a different mix of permits than we're seeing in urban. One of the things we're encouraging is for rural counties to look at different permit types. And then, but based on permit type, there's really different kinds of assistance, right, that an equity applicant would need. So a cultivation permit, it is the road maintenance, getting the land up to code, all of the CEQA, the stuff associated with cultivation that looks different than a business distribution permit. So there are definitely differences we're seeing in that that make the equity programs look unique in the rural jurisdictions. But again, you get more variety in license types, you can adapt your program to add services that are more relevant to different license types.
And we're almost at the end of the hour. There are still several questions that are here in the Q&A, and Craig and Don and Dominic, they will be captured. You will of course get copies of them. But if you have some closing remarks or some, if you want to send everyone away with some additional homework, now would be the time.
So I will say, kind of have I said on these sessions in the past, is this is just an introduction to the discussion, to where we're all accessible. Don't be afraid to reach out. We want the information. We want your help. We can't be successful with these programs without your help and guidance. So that's probably the most important part. Just because we have an hour and it goes by super fast doesn't mean we don't want to hear your thoughts and opinions. This is really an introduction, and we want to continue this conversation. The one thing that I mentioned earlier is our available survey that has a lot of these questions to provide some additional feedback if you haven't provided that yet. An easy way to do that is go nevadacounty.com. There's also a survey that has a link to it that we have available on our website. So again, it's anonymous. You don't have to provide your name or anything like that, but it's feedback that we want. And other than that, and Dominic and Don, I don't know if you have any additional closing comments, but just thank you to Pascal with Humanet. I really appreciate your time and making these possible. And Don and Dominic and all the work they've done, it's really incredible what they're doing and helping us out with. I didn't know anything about this until probably November, and they have helped me out a ton. So I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, I just want to express our appreciation to the county and to everyone who's been giving us input, and very grateful to be of service to all of you. And it's been a wonderful opportunity for us. Dominic, did you have anything else to say?
Yeah, I want to echo the gratitude here. Nevada County has been an incredible experience for me personally. You have some really strong communities, and you have, I think, people that want to listen and understand, that there are forces out there shaping this that are, very challenging, but you're in it together, and you're not fighting with your own county, basically, which is kind of a situation I think that a lot of folks find themselves in to a certain extent. And you're as strong as you are organized is what it comes down to. And putting in that time to take this community input and to realize that like it's a long process that you're at the beginning of. Even the whole cannabis market is right at the beginning of it, and that's gonna affect what's possible going down. But I feel like your communities are really embedded and they support each other. And that's incredibly promising to me. Like this process has had more community engagement and input than any of the ones that I've been a part of. And I think that just gives me a lot of heart that like you guys are going to develop this conversation and you're going to stay on it and you're already working together. And I'm inspired, and that's what I want to say.
And with that, I would say, of course, it's just the beginning, the kickoff of the conversation there. If there is interest, we're happy to have all of you come back and have another conversation. And hey, depending on when the conversation is going to happen, maybe there will even be some in-person. And if not, well, we have this platform. We're happy to make it available. And this discussion will be up on YouTube at the latest by tomorrow morning. And I'm sure that Craig and the comms team will publicize the link for anybody. And some of the emails that we got to townhall@ubanet have been sent, always anonymized. They have been sent to Craig, so Craig has copies of those. And thanks everybody again for coming. Thank you to the panelists and thanks to the attendees. And this is one of the reasons why we live in Nevada County. Night, everybody.
All right, thank you.